Here it is, my belated list. I considered not doing the prototypical preseason one this year because I just did one in August, and I wasn't sure if things had changed enough to warrant a new list. I think at a minimum though, even if they haven't changed much, I do have thoughts on players. So even if you don't want to call this a proper list, I'll have players still ranked ordinally, so it is then at least consider this space as the definitive source of my thoughts. Here are my prior lists: mid-season 2018, preseason 2018, mid-season 2017, preseason 2017, mid-season 2016, preseason 2016, mid-season 2015, preseason 2015, mid-season 2014, preseason 2014. Nothing has really changed since the August iteration on how I'm thinking about and value prospects. I use the same risk-adjusted approach I deal and think ranking players require two questions to be answered: who is most likely to be a successful MLB player, and then who has the highest potential. You cannot rank a player with only one of those answers. Both need to be dependent on each other to place a rank on a player. Potential upside tells you nothing, and probability of success doesn't tell you enough. Together those two questions have to interact to get the full picture on a player. We are also added by the fact that those two questions can be answered in part both through statistics and analytics. Probability of success is quantitative leaning, whereas higher upside is qualitative leaning. 1. Daniel Lynch, left-handed pitcher. I mention often how much better Lynch was as the spring of his draft year went on, as he started going away from Virginia's one-size-fits-all approach and towards his own. Lynch falling to the Royals was a blessing, given that I can't imagine the Royals expected him to still be there at 34th overall. On a redraft, he'd obviously go higher, which is a sign of his stuff once he started moving away from Virginia's mold, and then how well he pitched in his pro debut. He was dominant in a ball Lexington, as you'd expect a college pitcher from a power conference would be against teenagers. We don't really know ceiling, it's more a distribution of probable outcomes, and Lynch's distribution is probably something like 50%. He's a good stuff lefty that, while he doesn't have a true elite pitch, just does a bit of everything and has enough command to not go off the rails. If the Royals have a top 100 prospect, it is Lynch, I think. 2. Khalil Lee, right field. I admittedly go back and forth on Lee between a guy who might figure out contact, get into his power, and maybe play a few seasons in center versus tweener-ish profile. The bull case is what I just laid out: moves the hit tool up to a 50, gets into his 60 raw, and plays center well enough to stick. The bear case is that the hit tool never comes around and he gets demoted to right field, where power over hit guys are ubiquitous. Best-ish case, he could be a Curtis Granderson type, which would be a great outcome, a below-average defender in center, with a good power and some OBP but never hitting for a high average. Worst-ish case, assuming he makes the majors, is some sort of Aaron Alver, Justin Maxwell, Steven Souza Jr. type of decent OBP, poor average strikeouts, power, and average defense in right. 3. Michael Gigliotti, center field. The biggest question with Giggs is how he'd return from an ACL injury that sidelined him basically all of 2018. The answer: so far pretty good. The other day he tracked down a ball in right center he had no business getting to, showing that his speed seems to be fine. He has hit incredibly well too so far: .353, .476, .559, 203 WRC, and is 5 for 5 on steals in just under 10 games, further providing that his speed is fine. I can get the hesitancy towards someone like Gigliotti, as the power is limited, but that's only if you are looking at home runs and completely ignoring doubles and triples, which takes some power to drive a ball. Gigliotti has posted a career minor league ISO of .151, backed by 25 home runs and triples combined, or a 32% XBH percent. That's a similar XBH percent to what Jose Altuve, Whit Merrifield, Howie Kendrick, Michael Brantley, and Brett Gardner have done since 2016. plus defending, plus running center fielders with a good approach at the plate is a good player type, and guys like Ender Inciarte, Malik Smith, Lorenzo Cain, Dinard Span, and Kevin Pillar have shown that profile can work. 4. Nicky Lopez, shortstop. I go very much back and forth between Lopez, and it's nothing really to do with Lopez himself, who has a great approach at the plate and is a good defender, but how to value low power, contact first, middle infielders. In reality, a player like Lopez should be an everyday guy, as he isn't going to get destroyed at the plate, and can play multiple positions. The problem is that role isn't one that's going to win any awards, and it's like picking up little pennies to make up overall value. Lopez has some role with the future of the big league club, we've just got to wait and see what it is. 5. Kyle Isbell, center field. Isbell is the kind of guy who will probably be underrated throughout the minors because he'll just have to hit at each level to prove he belongs. We've seen these types of hitters come and go. Sometimes they turn into guys like Jackie Bradley Jr. or Tommy Pham. Isbell will have to continue that trend to get his due, but he's done it so far. Really, I think it's a bit interchangeable for the next handful of players and spots, but Isbell at least is my preference right now. Rankings are a snapshot in time, even if he's still in the prove-it phase. You don't have to squint to see a bunch of 50s across the board, and he'll likely get better in center field with more reps. Most likely, he is going to have a 45 hit tool in the rest 50s, but there is the making of an everyday player here. 6. Brady Singer, right-handed pitcher. I somewhat reluctantly put Singer here. I'm not an overall fan of his stuff and profile, but we've reached the point where his high probability of pitching in the majors for a few years warrants it. And I don't mean just because he was an early pick he'll get MLB time, but because he has enough stuff to stick around, like Jock Junis. I like Singer's fastball a bit due to the movement and delivery angle, but his curveball looks a bit too predictable and not enough sharpness to it. He made the Mudcats looks a bit silly the other night, chasing after his fastball up and changeup down, adding to the idea that he'll be drastically better against right-handed batters than left-handed ones, which I suppose given the choice is what you want. Brady Singer looked fine tonight. Curve change got several swinging strikes, 10 total overall. Command didn't look good, walked the first 2 hitters of the game and was behind a bunch, and fell apart a bit in the third, compounded by a pickoff error. 4.1 IP7K3BB pic.twitter.com/W6ZIM23MZ4, Sean Newkirk, at Seancor, April 12, 2019. 7. Jackson Kowar, right-handed pitcher. Kowar has always been to me a bit more of a thrower than a pitcher. He can bump it up to 98 mph, one of the highest in the system, but if the big 3 taken, Lynch, Singer, and Kowar, he has the worst command. He and Chris Bubic fight for the best changeup in the system, but Kowar has a much better fastball, whereas Bubic has the better curveball given its spin. 8. MJ Melendez, catcher. Another sort of reluctant ranking, where I don't really believe in Melendez as a future big leaguer mostly, but he's about even on MLB probability as most the guys in this area, and his upside is probably the highest. Melendez blew up over the past year physically. I wouldn't have called him scrawny or small to begin with, but now he has certainly added on size. This probably hurts his athleticism a bit, which can have adverse effects behind the plate that might not be an issue at other positions. My biggest issue with Melendez is his strikeouts and lack of elite power. You can live with the high Ks if he's hitting 450-foot shots and getting it in games. Melendez doesn't really do that. The power is more above average, enough to be dangerous but not elite, and the path to MLB catcher for prepsters is incredibly long and winding. There is a path to the MLB for Melendez, and while it might not be paved in gold, it's realistic to see him as some sort of backup catcher, bench bat a la Kelly Shopick, J.P. Arencibia, or maybe even a more everyday regular like Mike Zunino. 9. Chris Bubic, left-handed pitcher. Bubic has mostly mowed down the hitters he's faced so far in pro ball, what you would expect a more polished power conference pitcher to do against unrefined low minors hitters. Bubik is more of a pitcher than a thrower like Kowar, whereas Kowar has more lively stuff. Bubik's fastball sits several ticks lower. I can see the argument for Bubik having the better changeup, and his spin rates beat out Kowar by a mile. 10. Suli Matias, right field. Matias is basically MJ Melendez without defensive value but with more power, so maybe he isn't Melendez. The path to him making the majors is solely dependent on how much contact he makes. If he continues on his current path, he isn't a major leaguer. The correlation between minor league strikeout rate and major league strikeout rate is fairly strong. Here's the list of every MLB player since 2000 who had a career minor league strikeout rate greater than or equal to 29%. Matias is at 34% for his MLB career. It's just a tough profile to have any MLB success on if he's going to run modest to below average walk rates. 11. Kelvin Gutierrez, third base. Gutierrez has come on a bit hot this year, but that doesn't really factor into my ranking here, as 1 or 2 weeks of play shouldn't. He's an above-average fielder at third with a decent approach at the plate and some contact skills. He's not of diminutive size and he could turn his mostly average raw power into game power potentially. 12. Gabriel Cancel, second base. One of my guys. Cancel doesn't have flashy tools, but he's a bit like a middle infield version of Cheslor Cuthbert. Yes, I know the irony here of me liking a Cheslor Cuthbert-esque player. Stocky, hit well at a young age, has some innate power, and some bat control. He takes some big cuts every so often, which he'll have to tone back on, but there is the makings of some sort of big leaguer here. 13. Carlos Hernandez, right-handed pitcher. Hernandez has the best fastball spin rate in New York. One TrackMan source said he was up to the mid-2550s, which would put him in the top 20 of all MLB pitchers, and it's clear it is his best pitch. 14. Nick Pratto, first base. I wouldn't call Pratto a non-prospect, but I can't see how his stock hasn't done anything but take a big hit. Out of the drafts, he was thought to be a contact first hitter who will grow into more power and was a potential plus defender at the cold corner. Now he's gone on to strike out in 27% of his career MLB plate appearances and post a modest .159 ISO. One of those has to give, as you can live with the okay power if he's making good contact and not striking out. He's not, and his career MLB WRC is 115. Now he's in hitter's hell, that is Wilmington, which means we can adjust his numbers up a bit this year just as we can adjust downwards his numbers from hitter's heaven, that is Lexington. Note, minor league WRC only adjusts for league, not park. 15. Daniel Tillo, left-handed pitcher. Tillo's results might take away from his stuff, which is decent across the board, but hasn't really translated to strikeouts or run suppression. 16. Emmanuel Rivera, third base. Pretty similar overall to Gutierrez, whereas Kelvin is a bit further up the metaphorical ladder. 17. Jeffrey Del Rosario, right-handed pitcher. Del Rosario did pretty well as an 18-year-old in Lexington, a hitter's park, over the span of approximately 80 innings. He's already a bit filled out despite his age, so it's tough to see him tacking on more velocity, but it could be 50s across the board. 18. Jerson Garabito, right-handed pitcher. Higher spin fastball and curveball, but with dizzying and inconsistent results. 19. Austin Cox, left-handed pitcher. Cox might have had some of the worst college numbers you've ever seen for someone who went relatively early in the draft, 5th round, and didn't get a senior signing bonus, overslotted at $447,000, but he's got a decent fastball and a curveball that might play up a bit given his arm angle. 20. Blake Perkins, center field. I don't think Perkins ever hits enough to be a threat in any lineup, but he's a very good defender in center, which gives him a baseline to work with. Let's block ads. Why?